Well, welcome to the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm Michelle Paulson. I'm interim general counsel here, and we're just really excited to have you all here for what will be a very interesting panel on artificial intelligence and the law. I would like to thank our summer intern class who put this whole thing together. Minu, Ritika, Stanton, and Dell, thank you so much. And I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, WMF counsel Chuck Soff.
Thank you, Michelle. And I would like to thank you all for coming. And I would like to introduce you to our wonderful panelists who have also made their way here. Starting from the left, going to the right, we have Rebecca Krutoff. Rebecca Krutoff will shortly begin work as the executive director of the Information Society Project and as lecturer in law at Yale Law School. She has recently written on how autonomous weapon systems highlight the need for a war torts regime, how technological advances contribute to growing the executive branch's war powers, and how a weapon's characteristics affect the likelihood that it will be successfully banned. Next, we have Jimo Oviagale. Jimo co-founded Ross Intelligence in 2015 and currently serves as the company's CTO. In this capacity, he leads the development team behind Ross, the world's first artificially intelligent legal research assistant. Before Ross, he worked on self-driving cars, built text prediction software for wearable tech, and led a team of developers at an industry-leading design agency. Next, we have David Ahn. David is a partner at Fenwick & West LLP. He focuses his practice on developing patent strategy and managing patent portfolio for clients of all sizes in technical fields including artificial intelligence, robotics, and computer software. Based on his extensive experience, he has drafted and successfully prosecuted hundreds of US and foreign patents. And finally, Christopher Reed is COO and General Counsel at Zenti Inc., which provides proprietary natural language processing software. He has also worked for the United States Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations as an IEEE USA Fellow, as leader of the data modeling subgroup of the IEEE 2030 Smart Grid Standard, and as a co-founder of Albedo. Thank you all for being here. Let's give them a round of applause. So let's start out this evening with some sort of general background on AI to make sure we're all on the same page and know what we mean when we say artificial intelligence. So when you talk and think about AI, what's the sort of technology that you have in mind? And in particular, since this is AI in the law, what are the legally interesting portions of the AI landscape?
Yeah, well,
you grab the mic.
So, as many of you know, artificial intelligence is a field of computer science that tries to make computers, which by default are dumb, intelligent, and be able to understand our world. So there's different things to understand our world, knowing how to see, knowing how to understand language, understand conversations, and things like that. And it's pretty hard to define exactly what is artificial intelligence and what is not artificial intelligence, because we can't even define what intelligence is ourselves. So it's really a definition that's a moving target. What was artificial intelligence in the 90s, like the computer that beat Garry Kasparov at chess, that's not considered artificial intelligence today. And one thing that I'm sure all of you know is deep learning. And that today is synonymous with artificial intelligence. But that may not be the definition of artificial intelligence tomorrow. So in my opinion, really, artificial intelligence is a pursuit to help computers understand our world better and assist us.
And you have anything else to add? I know one sort of subpart of this that, Rebecca, you wanted to mention is what you mean by autonomous weapon systems.
Sure, yeah. So when I tell people I work on killer robots, they generally think one of two things. They think drones, um, or they think the Terminator. Uh, and I just want to clarify, neither of those are actually autonomous weapon systems. Drones are remote-controlled weapon systems, right? There's a human who's making the decisions about selecting and engaging targets. Autonomous weapon systems would be ones with sufficient artificial intelligence that they would be capable of selecting and engaging targets with, within parameters set by a human, but not necessarily predictable by a human. Um, and these such systems already exist, are already in use, and happy to talk more about that later. The reason why the Terminator is not an autonomous weapon system is because his target was selected for him. Right, Skynet there would actually be the right analogy for the autonomous weapon system. So, thanks.
Another thing that's come up in our prior discussions is the difference between artificial intelligence and automation. Would one of you like to expound on that just a little bit?
The automation has been around for generations, decades. Automation doesn't, from my opinion, the automation doesn't necessarily involve AI. In terms of, I think Jimo explained his opinion about intelligence. Uh, there are different interpretations of intelligence, but the basic characteristics of intelligence is how much you can make predictions and inference. That seems to be some of the characteristics of intelligence. The automation is not necessarily based on predictions or inference, so I would think that does not fall under the umbrella of intelligence, at least for now. The automation in like legal industry and other service industry has been going on for a long time, but the artificial intelligence has recently gained attention because of its additional its capability to do better inference and predictions.
And to add to what David was saying, um, AI isn't necessarily automation. If you think about how people had to do legal research back in the day before Westlaw, people had to physically walk to a library if the firm didn't have one. So if you think about it, Westlaw automated that in a way, but we wouldn't consider that artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence can be used for an automation, but it's not necessarily automation.
Are there any lawyers in the room tonight? One of the things I'm going to attempt to do tonight is to relate things to stuff that all of us had to be responsible for at some time, if not still. And there's a concept in the law about suing the United States government that relates to whether the person you're suing had discretion to make a decision or whether they're just carrying out a ministerial act. And I think that actually analogizes well to this topic of whether something's autonomous or whether it's just automated and how much actual decision-making power it had. So I just wanted to link that because it's something that all of us have been through and say, yeah, there's the idea of a ministerial act where I've got a set of rules, I'm presented with a set of circumstances, I apply the rules, I do what the rules say. In contrast to, I've got a decision to make, and I've got discretion about how I make it based on whatever authority I've been granted. And that, I think that framework actually is a nice analogy to what we're talking about tonight.
Thanks for that. One sort of more general question that I wanted to get into before we get into some specifics, like liability, for example, of AI systems, is that that tool of analogy and how and when it works and makes sense to analogize an AI system to a human, or to a different computer, and when that really breaks down and you're sort of misleading people by making those analogies instead of clarifying the situation.
So this is actually a huge issue for autonomous weapon systems right now because the law of war has very, very different requirements based on whether or not something's a weapon, in which case it's either lawful or unlawful, or if something, an entity is a combatant, in which case it can act lawfully or unlawfully. And the law tries to change and constrain actions through training and threats of punishment. And autonomous weapon systems are somewhere in between because of that discretion that you were talking about, right? They're not landmines that just react automatically, and yet they're not entities that, well, there's some opportunity for training, there's not the same like threat of punishment, and so there's no, the law of war doesn't really have an answer. There is no right analogy. I'm playing around with the idea of animals in warfare right now, and that's the right one. But even that's misleading because all of these potential analogies are embodied and limit, using any of these, it limits how we think about autonomous weapon systems, which are just as likely to be unembodied software. So analogies help make something accessible, and I can talk about the Terminator, and we can all think of something, but at the same time, it can be limiting in terms of how we think about both the entity and then how to regulate it.
Rebecca and anyone else who wants to chime in, what is the current state of the law in terms of holding AI systems responsible for legal harms, whether either under, like in warfare or in criminal law or in tort law, something like, so obviously an autonomous weapon system is one thing. Another thing is a self-driving car. If a self-driving car causes an accident, who is responsible? To the extent there is any sort of clarity or work being done here, if you could talk about that.
I'll stop talking soon, I promise. So with cars and self-driving cars, right, which is in itself an analogy that arguably limits how we think about this entity of autonomous vehicles, there's always a search for the human. There's always a search. Brian Kalo has a great piece that he just put out about the jurisprudence of robotics. When robots do something wrong, how everyone always looks to find a human to identify, to hold accountable. And that works with tort law. It doesn't always work with criminal law because of the mens rea requirements, that someone could use a robotic system that does something with no one ever acting with the right, with the bad intent required for criminal liability. But I think, especially in domestic law where we have recourse to tort, there's always a search for the human to hold accountable. We're not yet at a place where we're going to hold the system itself.
Well,
Yeah, we're definitely
I think it's a very interesting issue. So, I mean, there is no real law, there is no established law in this respect. I think a lot of it will go back to the contract law and decide who should be liable for each action and who has a duty to indemnify, and that may be one of the ways to go. The more interesting issue seems to be, I'm not an expert in this field, but like criminal law often involves like mens rea, what the state of mind was, and if something happens, if some, as Rebecca indicated, like killing robots kill someone, does he have the intent to do something like that? So if so, can we attribute that liability to someone who manufactured the device? That seems like a very interesting issue and perhaps needs some philosophical discussion.
Yeah, and the problem becomes even more complicated because with machine learning systems, sure, gives a system to the customer, and then the customer teaches it something, and then it does something bad. Where does the liability lie? So it becomes even more complex with these new types of systems.
So how do we decide what analogy to make when we're deciding this, when we're apportioning this liability either for this who is using this machine learning system, or in the autonomous weapon system context? Like, what's the, Rebecca, you said you were talking about maybe the roles of animals in warfare, and like how do we decide what the best fit is to analogize AI systems to?
So this is the classic lawyerly skill, right? Is what is most alike right here, and I think that animals are the best analogy for autonomous weapon systems at the moment, just because they're not like weapons insofar as they have decision-making capabilities, and they're not like combatants insofar as one, like I said, they can't be deterred through the threat of punishment, but they're also not like combatants in that they can be completely controlled. Autonomous weapon systems are subject to hacking and takeover in a way that combatants aren't, right? Which raises a whole different set of problems about liability. And so I think of animals, some like autonomous weapon systems fall somewhere in between, and that's why it's the best. But I don't think it's good. There, and this is just maybe an issue of something that's unique unto itself that is going to require new law. Like that's what one thing we do when law by analogy runs out. Say, okay, sometimes you just need new law, and I think that's where we're at with autonomous weapon systems. For autonomous vehicles, I think it's a very interesting question in a whole different area. I think calling them driverless cars makes them understandable, makes them accessible. Like there was like some picture on Time magazine a couple weeks ago of like a convertible with no driver's wheel, and we're like, oh, okay, I can imagine what that is. But it's also in its own way so limiting, right? Because if you're thinking of driverless cars, you're not thinking of smart highways, right? You're not thinking of a networked system of cars that avoid accidents in a different way than a bunch of individually owned cars would interact, right? And you're thinking, if you think about them as driverless cars, you're just thinking a lot of the you're still thinking of having cars in your driveway. You're still thinking of having parking garages, and like maybe none of that is going to be applicable if you're thinking about autonomous vehicles.
So we've mostly so far been talking about ways that AI systems can cause harm sort of physically and injure people, but there's also been some reporting recently and studies on how AI systems, particularly I think machine learning ones that learn from a data set, can wind up violating people's like rights, not just hurting them, injuring their rights against being discriminated against. So AI systems can perpetuate biases based on race and gender and other sort of protected classes. And what I'm wondering is, how can we design these systems to prevent that? And what is the cause of that in the first place? How can we design systems to prevent that? And then also well, let's start there. And maybe Chris, you might have some insight into this based on the work your company's doing.
So again, I think this is a case where no easy answers are coming right to mind across the industry. I think one aspect of developing these systems is humans are the model for them to learn from in so many cases. Because of that, what we're really doing is capturing human pattern recognition and other types of human skills in this area and then amplifying them. And so absolutely, to part of the question, how do these things get propagated? They're propagated from the source, and that's all of us. So I think, yes, that's already shown to be going on, and it's going to be continue to go on. I think as so many things require, this is going to require a tremendous amount of vigilance. And there's so many things that we see in tort law and kind of history of law where the first decisions aren't always the right decisions. And a lot of people leave court thinking, how could this have gone against them? You know, this was actually the wrong outcome. And okay, maybe this is the outcome based on the law today and the law needs to change, and that could take a while. So I think, unfortunately, there's probably going to be some bad outcomes or some maybe criminal defendants or the government cases against criminals around some of these things before we get this all right. I think we have to accept that as part of progress. So maybe that's very, very gloomy, but I think that's realistic. So I think, yes, we're the source of it in many cases. That means it's going to propagate into these systems, and it's going to take a huge amount of vigilance to overcome that. And I think the system we have now is slow at addressing some of those problems. Maybe some of this technology can make it faster than we had. As somebody that's worked in the legislative branch of the government for a while, it is, painfully slow. And it's not called progress; it's called progress. It's by design. It's supposed to be super slow and super hard to change everything. It takes a national crisis for anything to get done. I mean, that's the system we have. Certainly the states, some stuff can happen quicker. It's wonderful to be here in California. Hopefully things can happen quicker here. I expect the process to resemble a lot of what's already gone on before in terms of humans propagate that into the system. It's amplified up. Unfortunately, a certain amount of people come down on the wrong side of things to begin with. And then once that starts to be addressed a little better, then we do come to some of the right outcomes. Hopefully that ended hopefully.
What do you think of one attempt to address this issue is in the EU with their upcoming privacy law, EU-wide privacy law. One thing that they're planning on requiring is that any significant decisions about a person that are made through an AI system have to be explainable. So like a person has a right to know how the decisions were made that are affecting their life. What do you think of that as a solution or as a tool?
Can I start by making fun of Congress?
Always.
A scientist is testifying before Congress and says, Senator, the only way that wouldn't happen is if the second law of thermodynamics is repealed. Senator turns to aide and says, please make a note, we need to repeal the second law of thermodynamics. This is a fundamental problematic case of people trying to legislate about something that's not in their domain area of expertise. We're not in danger. Too many scientists and engineers getting involved in policy and in our legislative branch and in all the branches. So hopefully more of that will happen, and that will help some of this. But I think there's some fundamentally unrealistic aspects about saying any system that makes a decision then has to be accountable to that person in a way that a layperson can understand all the causality and all the detail of that system. Just as I think probably a lot of autonomous systems will be held to a higher standard than human systems early on in this process. I also think in this case, many humans make a decision where you think, how did that person come to that decision? And even if you have plenty of time for that person to explain that decision, Oh, plenty of opportunity to do that, and so that's the other aspect of this. That yeah, we have a lot of human participation still available, and that's also fits in kind of the appeal process or whatever you want to call it. That it's like you go through layers before a decision is final. People have
that is being contemplated in these EU regulations is actually impossible, like repealing the second law of thermodynamics, or do you think it just sort of hinders the technology to the point it's not useful?
so it's not physically impossible, but it's thermodynamic. So, and I mean, you could even say it's economically infeasible. So, just as Rebecca started off by saying, there's already there's already systems deployed that are doing these kind of things. So the fact that some people are thinking we should really outlaw these, and it's like, well, they're already out in the field. There are already decision-making systems out there that are in violation of that. And so I think it will be very challenging for Europe to say all those systems need to go offline in 2018, and there will be no accommodation made for that. Not only because even if they had a list of all those somehow, it would be very economically painful to take them off, but also there'll be systems that they don't even know are exerting that kind of influence over things. So.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. For example, deep neural networks. It's an AI algorithm based on the architecture of the brain. And even the scientists who develop those algorithms can't even explain how they work. So it's incredibly unrealistic to expect to give the user an explanation of how this computer, who thinks similarly but very differently from them, how it came to its decision. We can't even sometimes, like you said, explain how we came to the decision. It's like, I don't know.
Just to clarify, that regulation that's supposed to, the European regulation that is to come effect in 2018, they're still implementing it. The rules have been decided, but the implementation details has not yet been set. So they could make exceptions. They could actually remove some limitations about AI or some neural networks. So just to give you a little bit of background.
Thank you. I'd like to pivot a bit now and talk about intellectual property. So, David, maybe you can help us out with some of this. And I guess first, as a baseline, what sort of IP protection is currently available for AI systems themselves?
So there are three avenues of protecting technology related to AI. First is patent, which is the most strongest of protection. And there is the copyright protection, and then finally the trademark protection. So there has been some Supreme Court case in 2014 that is related to patentability. What is something that can get patents? So there has been some backlash about software algorithms and like business method and those kind of technology, which is not really technical, but more of like soft kind of technology. So there has been Supreme Court cases, and there has been a lot of patents that's been being rejected and that also being invalidated at court. But basically, my experience with all these AI technologies, a lot of them are technically driven. And if it's really technically driven, then they are mostly patentable. So that is still the strongest way of getting the protections on AI-related technology. And the subsequent is the copyright. Copyright will only be applicable basically when you copy the same software and install in a different device. So it's less of a protection compared to patent, but if it's blatant copying, then there is some protections that will be afforded. Finally, there is a trademark part where if you keep certain technology secret, then you can have it protected by trade secret. There's a funny thing about CNN, convolution neural network. There's like, for example, there's a when you train the device, then you come up with these coefficients. Those are things that allow you to actually do the predictions or inference. And is that something that there will be like a lot of those coefficients which will allow you to do the operations? Those kind of coefficients, if you copy and put it into a different neural network with the same structure, then you'll be able to perform in the same way. Would that set of coefficients be protected by any of these? That's actually unclear. Patent, I don't think it will be patentable for a lot of reasons. Copyright, you need humans' creativity. Those trainings are often performed autonomously, and humans don't get involved. So I don't think copyright would also play a part. So I guess a trade secret, if you train some artificial intelligence algorithm to perform certain operations, then you probably have to rely on trade secrets for those coefficients. Yeah, yes, that seems, it's still developing kind of area, so we still don't know what kind of protection. There aren't that many cases out there that actually addresses these issues.
Patent space, what sorts of trends are you noticing in terms of patents that are being granted for AI technologies? And then perhaps more importantly, how do you think patents on the AI technologies are either helping or hindering innovation in the AI space?
So I think the trend started from around 2010. There has been like, as Jimo has pointed out, the definition of AI has been fluctuating, and there has been a lot of failures in previous years. Like even in 1980s, 1990s, there has been some trend that, oh, we're finally going to see artificial intelligence, which never came into place. So at each of those periods, those patents or technology related to AI seems to bump up, and then they sort of die down. We see some different trends starting from like 2010. From that point on, it seems like patents related to AI seems to be really taking off. And when you look at those technology related to AI, there are basically three categories. The first category is real basic algorithms. Neural network is one of the algorithms that's being used. There are some other algorithms that is coming into place. Hierarchical temporal memory or some other innovative algorithms that's not well known, that's not been deployed yet. Those basic algorithms are being developed and are being filed as patent applications. The second category is the platform that uses such algorithm. You'll need to, in some of those cases, you have to encode data in certain ways, and you have to run some pre-processing. Those kind of technology also takes a lot of there are a lot of applications that cover that. And finally, there's really countless number of applications that's related to how you apply those artificial intelligence and do certain operations. And for example, I just had, today I had a meeting related to AI that relates to third category about applying the AI algorithm. As you may know, a lot of companies have put down open source codes for these AIs, and it's becoming much easier to actually deploy these in your business. So hopefully that.
I wonder as well about so many AI systems require these large sets of training data in order to be useful, in order to learn. And I wonder from business perspective and from legal perspective, how potential IP protection, particularly copyright protection over those data sets plays a role. Is it hard to get good data sets because of copyright protection? Are there a lot of open things like public domain or open source things out there? And how is that affecting whether someone can use machine learning system effectively?
So it's still evolving part of law. I think the fair use if would be one of the arguments that you can say you're not replicating the data that you're using to train the system. You're using those information to do something else. So perhaps that can be one of the defense against the copyright infringement. But no, it's still evolving. It also depends on what kind of algorithm you use and how those outputs vary from the original information. And I think one of the questions Chuck also asked was, what do you think about the patent becoming one of the barriers for further technology development? The reality is, it is. It will become a barrier at some point, but the reality is that a lot of companies are filing patent applications, and they will dominate the market at some point. So some conscientious researchers often don't want to file patent applications to basic ideas. Also, the other way is to do what's open source kind of licensing, where you open source license some of the basic algorithms, but if you want additional features, then you'll have to get patent license from them. So there are some researchers that do both ways, open source plus patent protection.
Gmo or Chris, have either of you encountered copyright issues in when you've had to try to access data sets for your systems?
Is this on? We haven't a lot. We've actually very actively tried to find data sets that are out public and that we can access, and we found a lot of those to be sufficient for what we wanted to do. And I think there's been, I guess, kind of around information retrieval type of folks have been, kind of collecting and grooming data sets for a while and stuff. And so we've been able to use a lot of kind of publicly available materials that are suitable. So that hasn't been a problem. But another company that I founded, which was around smart grid data, that was a little more challenging because all the stuff is basically business secrets of companies that are your own private data about when you turn the light on or when you turn something in your house and stuff like that. But for most of the stuff we're doing, it's empty. Fortunately, it hasn't been an issue.
Yeah, I will. We've experienced the same thing, and I think I'm not sure what are the licensing around Wikipedia's data, but I know that's very helpful in the community. So thank you.
All Creative Commons licensed. Yeah, because I wonder, we're here at the Wikimedia Foundation. We care a lot about Wikipedia, and in thinking about these systems, I think about the opportunities for using artificial intelligence in promoting access to knowledge, and I think especially about machine translation. And if you can get systems that can translate things really well, you could, for example, take the English Wikipedia, which is the largest version of Wikipedia, and translate it into other languages. So more of the world has access to that information. So it's good to know that there are lots of good data sets out there. I think my last question in the sort of IP section is over works and inventions created by AI systems themselves, and are those protectable by copyright and patent? And if they aren't now, at what point may they be in the future?
So the short answer at now is no. I mean, copyright or inventions are all contemplated to be made by natural person, which is human. Just taking an example of, I believe a lot of you have heard about the selfie monkey now. There was a federal court decision January this year, and it was held that a monkey could not be a author or creator of photo. So if monkey can become one, then AI, I think that's further away from the spectrum. So um, it's very unlikely that um, a AI would be recognized as um, a author or creator. But there has been some cases where a novel that a poem that was written by AI was registered at the Copyright Office. But that was back in 1980s, and I don't think you can expand that to the general acceptance that any creative product generated by AI could be registered or granted a copyright protection. The the answer seems to, I mean, if it is actually by the uh, if it could, there are three possible parties who can actually own or create um, have the ownership to the the article or whatever the AI generated. And the first is the programmer, and the second is the AI, and the third one is the user who actually uses that program to produce the article. And as you can see, the AI is out of picture. You probably won't be able to allow them to have any rights. So you can only look at the programmer who actually programmed it and the user. And if neither one of those actually people have contributed to creativity of the copyright material, then basically it's in the public domain. Nobody gets right to that article. As for the invention, it's basically same all around the world. I don't think it's all contemplated on the base. It's based on the fact that the humans can only make inventions. But the more important question is, would we need to make any changes to law to actually um, grant, uh, recognize AI as inventors or authors? Um, I mean, at this point, I mean, the Constitution gives patent protection and copyright protection for the reason to promote science and useful art. That's in the Constitution. And that's the purpose why we have this right. If you, by granting these rights to AI, would you promote science or useful art? And that actually seems to go into uh, free will of AI. If you come to a point where you can actually grant, if the AI has free will to decide where it wants to spend its resources, then you may contemplate giving rights to these machines. But at this point, I don't think any AI has the initiative to allocate its resources to inventing something or creating copyright materials. So the policy also is against granting any rights to artificial intelligence.
As just a quick follow-up, do you think um, an AI system that creates a potentially copyrightable work has and in the current state of the art, contributes more or less creativity to it than the monkey did in the monkey selfie case?
I mean, there are some instances. I don't know if the technology is at that level, but you basically tell a artificial intelligence to, oh, write me a romantic song. And I think there is possibly some technology to actually do that. I mean, you can feed some romantic songs to AI, and then AI can actually generate songs that's romantic and very pleasing to humans. And I think in that context, I think it could be better than monkeys.
Um, Thank you. And sort of pivot again and talk about privacy a bit. I think Chris and Gmo, this is particularly relevant to products you work on. And again, talking about these data sets that AI systems need, and depending on what the system is doing, that those data sets may contain a lot of personal information, like it's medical data or other information about people, and people may have concerns about their privacy and sort of what sorts of things the AI system may be able to find out about them, or how safe their data is in these. And I wonder if you could comment on that and things you've encountered there and precautions that you think these systems need to take to protect people's privacy.
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that question a lot, actually. And what we tell our users and our customers that the privacy issues that they should apply to our product are not really unique. Um, Data has been collected over the past decade, mounds and mounds and mounds of it. And actually, the last 2 years has produced 90% of the data that exists. And machine learning, actually, one of the motivations behind it was to make use of all this data because we're drowning it. Finding what you need is like finding a needle in a haystack. So a lot of people think that we are collecting more data because we're using machine learning. No, we're using machine learning to make sense of all this data that that we already have and is already out there.
So you're saying the cat is already out of the bag? So you're saying the cat is already out of, like the data is already
Exactly.
being collected, so any privacy violation would have probably already happened?
Precisely, yes. But privacy is still one of our top concerns, and we take it very seriously.
So it sounds to me like you're saying, okay, there's a needle in the haystack, and this is the magnet that we can now use to find the needle. But one of the things that's been personally comforting to me is the sheer amount of data that's out there, and that because of that sheer amount of data, they're, it's more unlikely that people are going to make sense of mine, maybe. So what your answer isn't actually comforting that you now have the magnet to find the needle. Do you feel like that raises other privacy concerns, that like you now have more capabilities to use the data that's out there? And this might be more for Chris too, in terms of the work is.
I do see a trade-off coming between privacy and security, and that we have some hard decisions. I think looking at it from the policy point of view, and let's take HIPAA, for example, in terms of medical privacy, there's already pretty strict laws about that. And that if you want certain benefits, the benefit of someone to come to the hospital with you and help you understand what the doctor's saying, you sign a release form that says, I want this person to get that information because I trust them to help me. I realize that most people don't think about corporations the same way they think about somebody coming to the hospital. That's a good thing. But I do feel like we can't foresee all the good and bad that's coming, and that kind of opt-in, opt-out, granted permission to participate, that's what has to come. I think there'll probably be some needles found where people say, this is ridiculous, how can you say this isn't wronging me, singling me out, this, et cetera. We'll have to make those carve-outs, like when you were talking about the rule in Europe, that, yeah, as stuff comes online, there'll probably be some people who are harmed. We'll have to make changes to fit that, and as the systems change. But I think that as a species, we are more and more sharing information about each other, living in denser environments, being more connected with each other. And I think there are some fundamental changes to perspective around that. When I was a kid, there was some condominiums put in. And I remember my grandmother saying, can you imagine living there? There will be people right on the other side of the wall living. They're are not part of our family, that I could never live in a condo because just that change that's occurring. I think there's a long march of that in our biological history. I think, yeah, we will have to make some decisions around that. There'll probably be some people that want to opt out. That should certainly be preserved. I think this goes back to this ultra hazardous activity we were kind of talking about before the panel, that there are some things that are just so valuable to society, even though you can't guarantee and you have to have strict liability around them and everything, but we're still going to allow people to practice these really dangerous things. The benefit is just so great. So I think we have a framework for that. Probably going to have to be modified. I think that analogy is, I find fits here.
So Jack Balkin has a great article out where he points out that we have lots of entities that we give very important personal information to, right? Accountants and doctors, and they have different fiduciary duties. And he makes the case for information fiduciaries, that entities that have access to sensitive information about us, thanks to big data, thanks to algorithms, should either, we should voluntarily sort of take on this code of conduct where they act, and it's professional to act as a fiduciary. And just think that's an interesting potential solution too.
I mean, we've seen, the analogy I'd make there and think back to is maybe common carriers. There was a higher standard. You're going to transport people on a regular basis and fly them all over and drive them all over. So again, yeah, I think there is the legislative force, and there's ethical force, and I think there's also market forces that hopefully will all push to get a very high level of acceptable compliance. Probably never be 100%. The system doesn't usually get that high of a result, but it should be pretty high.
One thing I wanted to ask you to talk about briefly, Chris, that Zenti is working on is this suicide prevention project. And if you could just tell people what that is and how you're sort of trying to balance people's privacy versus trying to help them.
Fortunately for us, the principal investigator is a medical researcher. He knows all the rules about, how human subject research has to be done. And another part.
So you're working with Vanderbilt University?
Actually, Dr. Joseph Franklin, who has just moved from Vanderbilt to Florida State. So Vanderbilt was very helpful to us, and we appreciate all that. Dr. Franklin was just, and he's the leader of what's proper and what isn't in terms of human subject research. I think from a clinical perspective, we've also gotten good advice from Dr. William Sledge at Yale University, who does a lot of work with deviant behavior and kind of people who are going to harm other people and stuff. And so we're exploring possible things that we can do there. And then the other partner we have is just announced today with National Veterans Foundation. They are, again, kind of the point of the spear on it. And so we're really a technology provider. And I think we do everything we can, one, to make sure they understand how our system works and how all the parts are in terms of that are significant to them making decisions. But in the end, in Jeff's case, all their people are on the front lines, talking to veterans, contacting them, and doing those. So I think what we've tried to do is use everything that's in place already, kind of have one degree of separation. We're a technology provider. These other folks who are the experts and responsible parties in those domains are making the final decision on how something should be, what's acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah, and just so, correct me if I get something wrong here, but as I understand what this project is these researchers are using your technology to try to build systems to help predict when someone is likely to engage in suicidal behavior. based on information it gathers about them. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
And what are the input data streams for that? Is it? I think I saw something about like social media behavior and other things that are like potentially there's a lot of private information.
So, yeah. So what I'd say is agreements that we have with, I would say this, all the information that we have is publicly available in some form or another. And I think the thing that our system has brought, so Dr. Franklin devised a complete system that was clinically effective before he worked with us. But he was applying it to a very small number of people. And he was doing that by working with clinical psychologists that were working with people and then using the system to help them reduce the probability that they were going to self-harm. What our system is doing is helping NBF and people like Dr. Franklin put it, if you want to think about it this way, put an offer in front of somebody that says, would you like to play this game on your phone? Or would you like to speak to someone? And so it's, so that's kind of the way that it's set up is they've already crafted a set of criteria that says these things indicate to us as clinical psychologists somebody might benefit from playing this game on the phone or being contacted by NPS, et cetera. And then we are basically just helping them sift through all the data to get to the people that they've already determined. Somebody has these 5 aspects, they're at a higher risk of reach them. If they don't, NVF, fortunately, 20 veterans a day committing suicide, and most of the time, they reach somebody, it's that person right at that moment, calling them at a very, very late stage. And so this is a matter of, I think of it like a work pyramid and the idea that, if you think about the least sophisticated task of a law firm or the least sophisticated task, somebody going through social media and saying, is there anybody here that strikes me as being at risk? That you could have, the lowest quality work done so that you could reduce what that very qualified clinical professional has to do. I mean, that's the goal. And yeah, it's really looking to replace that bottom pyramid, but not really change any of the sequence of the process.
I think I may have forgotten to mention at the beginning of this that we are streaming live on the internet. This is all being recorded as well. And in a few minutes, I want to take questions from people here. We have a microphone over there. And also anyone watching the live stream can submit questions via email to livestream@wikimedia.org. And we can try to get to those as well. But before we start the Q&A, I wanted to set aside a few minutes to just for you all to generally talk about how AI has started to affect the legal profession. Either obviously, Jimo, you're working on a product that is meant to help with legal research. But David, if you could also speak to how in your practice you've seen AI systems help you as a tool, and perhaps Rebecca as well in your research, if there's been anything that's made a practical difference.
Yeah, with our product, Ross, that helps junior associates with legal research, helping them do what used to take hours and minutes. What we're finding with these time savings is that these associates can actually reallocate their time to more value-add work. So it's kind of like Christopher's example, where you're cutting out the bottom of the pyramid of work that a computer can now do through just the existence of Ross. And now they could start helping their clients in so many other ways. And what we discovered through this, that there is a huge demand for technology such as Ross, because after 2008, clients started refusing to pay for legal research. So legal research turned from a profit center to lost potential revenue. So we're helping these law firms not only control their costs, but the junior associates who are using our technology in their day-to-day, it actually makes their work better, because legal research is not something that associates come to work and they're excited to do. They view it as tedium. And now they could do things that they went to law school for, things that make them feel creative and more value add.
So we have been looking into a lot of tools to use to automate the process. One of the success we've had was we document review. As you may understand, there's when we go through M&A or other transactions, there's like hundreds of contract documents for us to review. We have used a product called Seal, and also we have also tried Kira. And we basically had one set of attorneys use Kira in association with the review, and the other set of attorneys without Kira. And when we actually compared the result, we had much better result with the Kira in terms of the accuracy and everything. We also use Lex Machina. That's to determine what's the likelihood of winning or losing a litigation. That company has been acquired by Lexis, and we have been using that for quite a while. And there are a lot of tools that's coming into place. Actually, we were trying to get in touch with Ross. We haven't been able to, they were too busy. So we are looking into a lot of developments in this AI, and that's coming into market. So if you have any interesting products, we'll be happy to know and try them out. We think it's starting to take off. Perhaps in a couple of years, we'll see a lot of automation tools based on AI, and it may take away some of our jobs, unfortunately.
Yay, academia. So what is AI doing in the law of war? It's doing what new technology often does, which is it's highlighting gaps and assumptions that you didn't even necessarily know you had. So one example of this is the question of what is the appropriate amount of human decision making in attacks, and that was never really that much of a question, because it was just always assumed that there was a human a human deciding when to use lethal force in attacks. And certain new technologies stretched the connection a bit, right? Like landmines. That's sort of attenuated. Drones created the possibility of geographic distance from the person deciding to use lethal force and the person was the target. But autonomous weapon systems have really reignited this, or created this whole debate about like what constitutes meaningful human control over an attack. Is it a person actually pulling a trigger? Is it a person watching a machine with a veto power where the machine's deciding to pull a trigger? Is it a person writing a program that results in a machine pulling a trigger? And so it's opened up like this question of what is the appropriate amount of human control in attacks, and a whole host of other ones. Yeah.
Thank you. Now I'd like to open it up for questions. If anyone in the audience here has a question for the panelists, please line up at that microphone over there, and you can ask. While you are thinking of things, I'll ask one more question to our panelists. And at what point, where are we, do you think, in these AI systems taking over and replacing people's jobs, or significantly changing people's jobs in the legal profession?
Well, I mean, there was an article just last week about Law and AI on Law 360. There will be, there is, and there will be replacement of menial tasks, like some review of documents or processing that requires not much of a judgment, but like drudgery kind of work. I think that's probably the ones that will be really easily replaced with automation or artificial intelligence. That will be the first ones to go. I think for more sophisticated kind of work, like you're going to the court and you're having someone represent you, I don't think AI would ever take over those kind of roles. So the higher and the more value-added kind of technology it is, it's likely to be preserved. Whereas if it's like reviewing documents and finding those kind of some issues in contracts, that's actually better for AIs. They do better job. So those kind of works may get replaced. And it is like, I mean, that's the nature of the work, you know, nature of how things evolve. The more efficient things take over, the less efficient entity. That's how this thing has been moving. So we do anticipate that to happen pretty soon.
Great. Okay, thanks. Let's go to the questions. And feel free to introduce yourself and if you are, and whatever affiliations you might have, if you'd like.
Hi, I'm Amrita. I'm a first-year law school student. Hi, I'm Amrita. I'm a first-year law school student. I'm currently interning with a tech company that uses deep learning in its GPUs. So I have very limited knowledge about software and technology. I was trying to understand that open source software and trade secrets, they seem like contradictory to each other, and how you could protect open source software used in some of the deep learning algorithms, how you could protect it under the trade secret law. If you could please explain that a little.
So basically, open source, whenever you actually develop those algorithms, and it depends on what type of open source you have adopted, but basically it allows someone else to modify it, making changes, and the other person is also not going, and he can make the changes downstream, and people would not, the originator would not sue someone for copyright infringement. That's the open source approach. So once you take the open source approach, there are maybe some components that you may want to keep as trade secret. As I told you before, like coefficients in neural network, you don't have to release that into public. You know, you may want to keep that as a trade secret. These set of coefficients resulted in the best results. So you keep that as a secret, but you may also want to have other people use your software. So you put that as an open source. So you may want to take bifurcated approach of which ones to put down in open source and which ones to keep as trade secret. And that depends on what kind of algorithm you use, and it's a little, it needs some strategy formulation. It's not an easy yes or no kind of answer.
Hi, Peter Eckersley at EFF. I have a question about transparency and regulation of neural network systems. Maybe you can hear me better here. I have a question about transparency and regulation of neural network systems. So I think a lot of people who are deploying deep learning systems want to know why they make decisions that, and it's sort of an open research question how well and generally you can do that. Sometimes maybe you can figure out oh, it gave me this result for these reasons, and sometimes you can't. But supposing that question makes technical progress, and over time we have algorithms where it's possible to do some kind of, I don't know, some kind of Monte Carlo analysis and spit out at the end, you know, here's how the inputs could have been different in order to change the decision that I made about whether you, dear human, were creditworthy or likely to reoffend, or, you know, due to receive a Hellfire missile from my drone. And the question I have, I guess, is under what circumstances should we regulate? What kinds of triggers should we use to require this kind of transparency, which I think Christopher pointed out is more than we ask of human decision makers. But should we strive to hold these kinds of decision-making agents actually more accountable than the humans who are making decisions right now? And if so,
I think we should strive to hold the human decision makers more accountable as well. So I think one of the benefits of this technology should be to apply more scrutiny to both types of systems, both autonomous systems that are helping make decisions about this, as well as people who might be involved in those decisions. And I think it presents exactly that opportunity. So I'm not sure. I think the same progress, the same types of progress that makes it possible for that, yeah, should also be applied to both types of systems. And then, yeah, when you said Monte Carlo method, I think that's kind of one of the natural ways of saying, let's fire a bunch of data at the system, show the result, and then you came out in this spot. Changing these other inputs would have put you in that spot, and helping that person understand. If you have a goal that you want to put the right inputs in to get the right outputs, this is what it takes to get the result. So again, that definitely, hopefully will push us toward more open systems in terms of understanding what inputs produce what outputs, and being able to provide a set of rules that everybody understands and that we all get the same results from the system.
We have an email question that I want to read to you. It is, we may have a world where people and/or businesses are augmenting themselves with AI, much like how people are doping in sports. How can laws keep the playing field level?
I don't have an answer to that. So, David, if you do. So yes, taking advantage, the questioner is not here, I'm going to sidestep that somewhat. And note, though, that oftentimes augmentation is really helpful. So Centaur chess teams, right? Machine-human teams are far better at chess than either purely machine or purely human machines. They're reliably better. And there's a similar move in warfighting to have Centaur courts. So this idea that we were talking a little bit earlier about, is it going to be AI versus human? In many cases, the solution may be humans augmented by AI. This might be a good thing. It might be useful and helpful, as opposed to problematic criminal in the doping, with the doping analogy. So yes.
Well, but the larger question is, do we need to make a level playing field? I mean, in any case, you have tools. You have better tools. You have worse tools. If you have better tools, you will win or you will produce better result. So don't you have to actually promote people to augment their decisions to come with a better conclusion using better tools? Maybe that's my thought. People may have different ideas.
Yeah, it may be a different situation in like sports, where trying to measure human achievement.
Good evening. I'm Gordon Endo with Gordon and Reese. Thank you for a great discussion on an interesting topic. I have two questions, one primarily for Rebecca and one primarily for Chris. The first one is, when we were talking about liability and who's responsible, I'm trying to fit that into some sort of regime of the law that we already know about. For example, TerraSoft versus University of California, Regents of the University of California, regarding a duty and whether or not somebody has tort liability. We've been talking about AI systems, but I'm not sure what we mean by that. Rebecca, you talked about AI could be just software. So I was thinking of it before as a system with hardware and software. But with cloud computing, for example, you don't necessarily need to have that, or it doesn't need to be part of the system. So the question is, Is there a paradigm? Is there some way you all are thinking about what constitutes an AI system? And then for Chris, it's a totally different question. Um, the FTC has, as you probably know, guidelines for software developers called privacy by design. And I'm wondering what you think of that type of application for AI. Thank you.
So, as Jimo mentioned earlier, right, there's always moving goalposts in terms of what constitutes artificial intelligence, what constitutes autonomy in weapon systems. And as evidenced by the fact that government representatives have been getting together for 3 years now, an annual meeting every year, and still can't agree on an international definition for autonomous weapon systems. It's still plagued by disagreement over whether that's something completely in the future or something that we've had for 30 years. I have my own definition that is a system that can be embodied or unembodied, that is capable of making, based on pre-programmed constraints and gathered information from the environment, capable of selecting and engaging a target independently. But this is a hotly contested subject, and it's still changing. So.
Very difficult question to answer in a short amount of time, but I would say the lawyer in me loves the idea of private by design. Let's make systems that don't create liability for the manufacturer or the person using. I think the engineer in me likes the idea of getting our society to recognize the tremendous benefits that are there, and people giving permission to participate in a system whereby we're all going to benefit by getting as much participation as possible. I think, whether it be bone marrow donation, other types of things, where it's like the more people that participate, the more beneficiaries there are, kind of herd immunity around vaccinations, and there's just, we are becoming more and more social, more and more connected. I think there's just so many benefits that come out of it. So even though I think you should preserve the rights for people to opt out, and you should create systems whereby people can remain anonymous, my hope is that we'll embrace more and more participation and cooperation.
Hi, my name is Francesco. I'm a computer science and philosophy student, and I'm a growth engineering intern at Mozilla. I was wondering if you can imagine a future in which we've been able to identify uniquely human intelligence, and we've developed sufficiently advanced computers to replicate said intelligence, how that would affect the research, business, and policy decisions you guys make every day.
So I'll just give you a sample of patent law. So there is a concept of singularity event, as you may all know about. It's singularity event is when the artificial intelligence is developed to such an extent that it evolves itself. And at some point, it will exceed humans' intelligence, or perhaps even the entire human intellect. And if that comes into force, we define that as, I don't know it'll happen or not, but a lot of people say that it may happen in around like 2040 or so. That's the prediction. If that happens, my job is done. Basically. There won't be any inventions, because any inventions that you can contemplate will come from that AI. They can solve all the issues, all the problems, and I won't have any inventions to file as a patent application. So it's just a sample area, but if such an event happens, I don't know what law will be able to survive. There needs to be total revamp of the entire system.
I won't have a job either.
One of my favorite XKCDs is called Judgment Day. reference to Terminator again. And it's, the day that Skynet gets sentience, and the caption, the picture is just of the Earth with a little bubble, speech bubble coming out of it saying, "Wait, what are you guys even doing with all these nukes? Never mind, never mind. I'm just sending them all into the sun." And
Hi, my name is Karen, and I'm currently a student at CU Boulder, and I'm interning with Twitter this summer in their legal department. So, based on your last answers, it might look a little bit bleak, especially by 2040. But what suggestions do you have for current law students or newly emerged lawyers who are interested in getting into this space, but might possibly, our research might be, sourced out to Ross, and knowing that possible, and knowing that everything is changing so quickly and so much of it is so hotly contested. So what kind of fundamental skills can we really look to build as new lawyers so that we can still show our value, at least for the near future? Maybe by 2040, I'll have to teach myself how to code, something like that. But for the near future, what can you suggest for new lawyers?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I never went to law school. But what I will say is that a human is at the center of the Ross experience. It still takes a human to talk to the client or another lawyer, being able to empathize with the client, understand their needs, contextualize that, and formulate a question. And what should you be doing? I would point to the example that Rebecca brought up about Centaur chess. Actually, the top Centaur chess players were these two friends, and they were able to be grandmasters who were also paired with chess playing computers. And how they're able to do that is they're simply able to utilize computers better than everyone else, even though they're inexperienced and probably had a lower IQ. But it's just like teamwork, except your team members are machines. So you have to teach yourself how to really leverage technology to do more than you could by yourself.
Yeah, I would say one thing we've noticed with our tool is that one thing I've noticed with our tool that's very similar to what Kima just said is people have a vision of how they're going to use the tool to kind of use the magnet to find one needle in a haystack. What they end up realizing is that they learn so much more about the data set, so much more about what they thought was like clever key terms and clever Boolean expressions and all that, that they find that that stuff is very clumsy now that they have this. And so it's a unleashing of human potential that is amazing. And so that's a general rule I've seen people interacting with these type of systems, the experience of our system. I'm just glad to hear very similar thing from you. Specifically in law, I know attorneys now that never, I mean, they have their email printed out by somebody that works for them, come in and they mark it up and things like that. And I'm not saying that that's a bad idea or that it's wrong. It seems very foreign to me because I was an engineer and computer person for so long that I do feel like getting facility and being fluent with it is going to give a type of potential. So another way to say, I think something very similar to what you said is understand what those systems are really good at, what they're weak at. Get good at making them do the things they're good at, and then, yeah, focus on the things that they're weak at, and make yourself. So that complementary set, I think, is the one that makes the most sense to me.
Okay, I think we'll take these next two questions in line and we'll be done.
Hi, I'm Ken from Trust and Safety in Twitter. I have two actual questions. So for Rebecca, what are some positive applications for these autonomous weapon systems? What are some examples? And just for the general group as well, like, so just based on what we've heard so far, it's that, you know, we have the potential that some of the manual jobs are going to be taken over by some of these machines. And what do you think the impact is for underprivileged communities who don't have access necessarily to funds to get an education, become more highly skilled?
So with autonomous weapon systems, again, like a lot of technology, their pros are their cons and vice versa. So some of the pros are that they're not humans. They're not affected by boredom, by fatigue, by hunger. They're not subject to, they don't act, out of a desire for vengeance or vainglory or revenge. The flip side of that is they don't empathize, they don't show mercy. Other benefits, I think a huge benefit, is that they have potential to be far more discriminate than other kinds of weaponry, and as a result, cause far less collateral damage, which means less human beings killed. And they also offer huge amounts of troop protection, which again means less human beings being killed. Again, there's always the flip side, less your constituents being put in harm's way might, there's an argument that makes it easier to go to war than it might be otherwise, which might result in more human beings being killed. And these are just very, the good could be the bad, could be the good kind of thing.
We haven't talked about it tonight much yet, but I mean, there's also the law enforcement context, and that's come to the fore here in recent times. One of the things I think about is two sides of this. It's very easy to send a machine in to deal with somebody versus humans have to deal with it. But the other side of that I've thought of is, right now, if you're going to use deadly force as law enforcement, the idea is shoot to kill. If you're justified in using force, that other person's a risk to you or other people, so therefore you basically shoot to kill. And I think there's a potential for less than lethal force use and kind of more discrimination, even in the law enforcement context inside the country. I've spoken about much.
Do you have answers for the second part of that question on, do you want to restate it?
Sure. What's the impact based on all the automation, basically the outsourcing of manual jobs to machinery? So that could have an impact on underprivileged communities who don't necessarily have the funds to pursue higher level education. And what do you think can be done?
I've worked in the small claims clinic and have become aware of that. Yes, not everybody gets the same access to legal representation in the system based on how much money they have, et cetera. I think the way I see the American system is that it's trying to raise the floor, the ceiling, and everything in between at the same time. So I think it's going to be hard to close the gap. There is something in physics called the tidal wave. And the idea is you fall into a black hole, things that are close might fall in really fast compared to the things back, and they get torn apart. And so what we're talking about here with singularity, and we're talking about a very, very high acceleration of some people getting the benefits of these, even a slight bit ahead of other people. It could be quite a violent separation of people. I think, again, I feel after working in the Senate, I have so much confidence in our government. I really, I thought I might come back more cynical and everything, but I came back feeling better that even though the system works so slow that it's frustrating, that it's like, that's by design, and it's the idea of, people being able to participate in the process and the system going slow and representation and all that. So I'm actually quite confident in the system's ability to make sure that those tidal forces don't get too violent, that things don't get pulled apart in ways that are too unfair. And again, I'm also an optimistic an optimist about us becoming closer as a social group and sharing those benefits by participating. So maybe that's unrealistic, but that's how I feel.
Well, I guess AI could have also some positive impact. So depending on how it's actually implemented. So for low income, they may be able to access like online lawyer, which will be able to provide like answers, which would require much more research. Um, it's um, it it all goes to how you develop the system. If you are more concerned about helping low income people, uh, it it could be done this way, and it all goes to how the investments and all we do. It's like all other tools. Like if you have a knife, you can kill someone. You can also make a very good um, uh, pasta or food or whatever. So it's all one of the tools, and it all depends on how we actually use that tool to achieve whatever purpose we think we should uh, achieve.
And I don't have any idea about what the solution is, but I know that there will be a problem. Just take driverless cars, for example. In the United States, the transportation industry employs 2 million people. And this technology is on the verge of being deployed. Um, and I think this is a problem that we have to recognize. I don't see, I'm actually surprised that none of the presidential candidates really talked about it this much because I do think it's an urgent problem, but I have no idea what the solution will possibly be.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Last question. Let's see if it's something we can answer
Mhm.
very quick. Is there a lower time?
Okay. I'm Zoe at the legal counsel of the Wikimedia Foundation. My question is actually a follow-up to Ken's question, so maybe there's not much more to say. But again, it's about this job-taking aspect of AI. And we have seen today, like this year in the political cycle, there's this populist movement against free trade agreements because people feel, although it improves the productivity of a country, it might not be distributing the benefits equally. And I feel AI could have the same effect. So the question is, where AI, these autonomous agents don't really have political power, and you still have citizens with political ability to vote out politicians who don't support them and who feel they're cheating them, how could you frame the AI debate so that people don't take it the wrong way and feel like we have to start restricting the development of technology?
I certainly think there will be very active inhibition of AI damaging human social fabric, as there has been protectionism in the history of the world and certainly in the U.S. over the years. So there'll have to be a balance of that, what I would call, active negative feedback to keep a system under control. So in control theory, any system without a negative feedback loop gets out of control. I think, that's what we need is a negative feedback piece in there in terms of, even if the singularity approacheth, that there has to be some negative feedback loops that keep it under control and working in our best interest, predominant. I think you could argue with the invention of money, or you could have so many things that were invented that had some negative effects. I think the balance to that is I've spent a good chunk of my life as a programmer in the technology business, and it's a constant race to learn the new thing, stay ahead of stuff. And I think that reality is part of the very fabric of certain subcultures in the world already, some of which are very strong in the technology business. And there's already an acceptance in those communities of constantly retooling, constantly learning. And I think that philosophy will have to spread more deeply and have an earlier and more profound start into the lives of our young people, So I think those two things will be creating a health. Those two things are two things that will contribute to creating a healthy equilibrium in that way.
Well, thank you all for coming out to the Wikimedia offices this evening, and thank you to everyone who is watching the live stream. We get a round of applause for our panelists here. And thanks especially to our summer legal interns here at Wikimedia Foundation who organized this event and came up with the questions that I asked. And they've just done incredible work. And to anyone who's here or watching who is a law student or someone looking to get into the tech law field, I invite you to look into and apply to our intern and fellow program. We have people year-round who help us out on the legal team, and you should look into it. And thank you so much. We have some food and drink left, probably, and I invite you to stick around a bit. If you're watching the feed, unfortunately, we can't provide you with food or drink, but thanks again for coming.